After completing my 10th class exams in 1979, my father suggested that I go and help my father's uncle and learn astrology. Mathematics being my favorite subject, I learned the calculations. My grandfather taught me how to calculate the inclinations of each planet and how to calculate the lagna and the meridian center MC. And he gave me some birth charts to draw. Thus, I learned how to draw the birth charts first and showed interest in predictions. So my grandfather told me some predictions, some of the tips that he usually uses for predictions, and after learning those tips I documented some of them. I verified with my father. While my father and my grandfather have laid the foundation for me to get interested in astrology, for almost a decade or 2 decades, I didn't show any interest. Welcome to Shasvikara's Astrological series. This is the presentation about Vivah Vilamb. That's the topic that I'm presenting. Yeah, I already had presented 5 parts of it. I had taken some examples, both male and female natives, and I had explained from an astrological perspective why there is a delay in marriage, or why the native couldn't get married and remained unmarried even at the age of 36 or over 36 years old. This is in this presentation. This is the part 6 presentation. I'm exclusively considering 4 female charts. I had requested for some examples in the Facebook Vedic Astrology Facebook form, and the members in that form were so friendly. Some of them provided their own personal birth details, and separated. I took all the female natives birth details, and presenting it in this presentation as part 6. So there are 4 female natives that I took it, and I'm presenting it in part 6 in this presentation, part 6. This is purely for educational purposes. Please keep in mind that whatever I am presenting is to the best of my astrological knowledge, and these are just the predictions based upon the rules of the astrological principles that I learned from my father and grandfather. I hope you will like this presentation part 6 too, and very soon what I'm going to do is to get the part 7 also ready, and probably within a month I will try to upload the part 7 also in YouTube. This part 6 I will try to upload before the end of July 2020. Here is the 6th part for the Vivah Vilamb special cases, and in the 6th part I took exclusively only female charts. I did get few charts, and I picked the first 4 that I got it, and the remaining female charts that I got it, I will be including that in part 8. Part 7 is for the male charts. The first 4 male charts that I got it will be in part 7, and the remaining in part 8 I'll include the remaining 8, sorry, the remaining female charts. In this part 6 chart, the 4 examples I took are, all the 4 of them were born between 1982 and 1987, and as usual all of them were born in India. That's the reason why uh, I got these 4 female charts when I posted it in Vedic Astrology forum. That's the reason why I could get all the female charts who were born in India. So let me go in detail. I'm going one chart at a time. I'm going to explain in detail why this particular native is still unmarried as of July 2020. Let me start analyzing the first example. This is the female chart. The native was born in 1987 on 17th May 1987, and when you look at the chart, when you draw the D1 chart, that's the only thing I look at it. The first thing I look at is what are the houses, who are the house lords, and the important houses pertaining to marriage, and who is residing in that particular houses. The Lagna is Sun. Lagnadipati is Sun. So the first house lord is Sun, and the Sun is residing in the 10th house owned by Venus, and Sun is co-joined with Mercury. Mercury is the second house lord. So Sun, the Lagnadipati, is residing with the second house lord Mercury. That's a very good sign, and it is residing in the 10th house. It's not any bad one to talk about. The next thing is and no other planet is residing in the first house. So we go to the second house. Mercury is the lord of the second house. Mercury is co-joined with the first house lord Sun in the 10th house from Rashi Lagna. And then in second house, what you see is Ketu. When you see Ketu in the second house, that means in the 8th house, Rahu is residing. Rahu is having a direct aspect on the second house. Second house is Kutumbasthanamo, which tells you that this particular native's ability to start a family will be chaotic. There's no guarantee. There's so much of uncertainty in it when it comes for the native to start a family. The third house we don't need to worry. The fourth house. Fourth house lord is Mars. Mars is in the 11th house from Rashi Lagna. And in the fourth house, what you see is Saturn, a malefic planet, Saturn. Fourth house is Kutumbasthanamo. In Kutumbasthanamo, or home life environment, there is a malefic planet. And now let's go and look at what houses does this malefic planet owns. This particular malefic planet, Saturn, owns 6th and 7th houses. 6th house is house of separation, and 7th house is the Kalatrasthanam. That means the most important houses when it comes to the possibility of getting married is owned by Saturn, and that particular Saturn is now residing in the 4th house. 4th house is the home life environment. So now we saw the second house, how uncertainty is there in the second house. Now in the 4th house, a malefic planet is residing in the 4th house. So the same thing goes. It's very bad when it comes to the 4th house. And now that lord, the 4th house planet, is the 6th house of separation, 6th house lord, and the 7th house Kalatrasthanam. So by default, the 4th house also got spoiled. Next we go to the 5th house. The 5th house lord is Jupiter. Jupiter is residing in the 8th house. That's a very bad sign. And the 12th house lord Moon is residing in 5th house. Moon is Matrukaraka, and also the 12th house lord. This is a very good sign. Unfortunately, this particular thing didn't happen because Moon, even though it owns the 12th house and it is residing in the 5th house, Puttakaraka, and the 12th house is pleasures of bed, the native will not get the enough pleasures of bed and will not be able to progeny to reproduce children, is because the Moon is in the house next to the Saturn's residence. There's a BSP rule that says that wherever Saturn resides, he spoils the bhava of the house next to its residence. Here it's residing in the 4th house, so it is going to spoil the bhava of 5th house, which is Putrasthanamo. In that spoiled house is where the 12th house lord Moon and the Matrukaraka is residing. Unfortunately, because of that reason, the natives don't have the ability to have children. And I said the 6th house is house of separation. Saturn owns it, residing in the 4th house, Kutumbasthanamo. The Sukhasthanamo, or home life environment. It is having its third. Saturn is also looking at the 6th house. The 7th house is its own house, so nothing can be done. Now comes to the important, is the 8th house. The 8th house is place where Rahu and the 8th house lord, 5th and 8th house lord Jupiter is residing. That's another bad sign. So when you look at this D1 chart and just look at the important house lords you can say that how much negativity is there in this particular nature. Let's go to the sun and look in detail about the planet's inclination with the assumption that the time of birth is correct. If you look at it, there are two planets that are in Rasi Sandhi, Sun and Mars. I highlighted them. So let's go and look at those two planets in detail. Sun is the Lagnadhipati. So the Lagnadhipati itself is in Rasi Sandhi. So there's no clearly whether the Lagnadhipati is saying that whether the Sun is in the 12th house or in the first house. There's no clarity here. Because of that, Lagnadhipati being in Rasi Sandhi, the natives Tanusthanamo, the will be Tanusthanamo is self, is also in some sort of uncertainty. The next thing comes is Mars. Mars is the lord of 4th house and the 9th house and residing in the 11th house. 11th house is house of desires. So the Mars, the violent planet Mars, is residing in the house of desires, and that particular Mars is also in Rasi Sandhi. So if you take the Mars in the previous house, right now it is in the 11th house. If you take Mars and assume that it is in the 10th house, the previous house, then it has co-joined with the second house lord Mercury and the Lagnadhipati Sun. That's a bad sign. If you take Mars to be in the current house, wherever the Gemini, wherever it is in the chart that you see in the chart, then it is having a 7th aspect from the moon, which is a Kuja dosha. So when you see the planet inclinations, with the assumption that the time of birth is correct, and probably it will be, even if the time of birth is an hour or so here and there, the planet inclination would be almost same, because Sun and Mars doesn't change the inclinations that fast. They should be at least 24 hours, minimum 12 to 24 hours difference should be there for that to be changed. So I'm assuming that if the time of birth is correct, this particular two planets will be in Rasi Sandhi. So that you can clearly say that, see here is that the Lagnadhipati is in Rasi Sandhi, and the 4th house lord, let's take only the 4th house. 4th house lord Mars is also in Rasi Sandhi. Let's go and look at in the D1 chart the aspects of these important planets. First of all, we'll start with the first house lord Sun. Sun is in the 10th house from Rashi Lagna. So its direct aspect is on 4th house, which is owned by Mars. So Sun and is now directly looking into the 4th house, where its bitter enemy Saturn is residing, and that means the Lagnadhipati is looking at its bitter enemy Saturn, who owns the 7th house too. That itself tells you that the ability for this particular native to get married is close to zero. Now let's go to the second house lord Mercury. Mercury is co-joined with Sun, so that means Mercury is also having a direct aspect on Saturn, the 7th house lord. Saturn is a natural malefic, so the second house also got through the aspect. The second house lord's aspect is also gone. Now go to the 4th house. The 4th house lord is Mars. Mars has three aspects. Mars' 4th aspect is on the 2nd house, that is Mars is residing in the house owned by Mercury, and also looking at the house owned by Mercury, the 2nd house. So the 2nd house, so Mars, a violent Mars planet, is now looking at the 2nd house, which is, that means if the native gets married, the Kutumba Sthanam, the ability to start a family will be chaotic and violent too. Next comes Mars direct aspect is on the 5th house, where the 12th house lord Moon is residing. Moon is also the Matrukaraka for females, so that the violent planet looking at Moon is not a good sign. And the third one is Mars 8th aspect. Mars 8th aspect, Mars is the 4th house lord. Now with its 8th aspect, it is looking at the 6th house, house of separations. So when a 4th house lord is a malefic or a violent planet like Mars, Jupiter, Mars, Rahu, Saturn, and it is the fourth house lord, and it's having an aspect on the sixth house, which is house of separations. It is also having an aspect on the second house, Kutumbasthanamu. This itself tells you that in case if the Netu gets married, the chances are very high for the Netu to have a troubled home life environment and fightings with family members, and also that might lead into separation, means getting divorced. So that is the another reason it is. And the next one is the fifth house lord. The fifth house lord is Jupiter. Jupiter is residing in eighth house. That's a very bad sign. And now look, let's go and look at the Jupiter aspects. Jupiter's fifth aspect is on the 12th house from Rashi Lagna. 12th house is pleasures of bed, so a 8th house lord looking at the 12th house is not a good sign. It is for whether male or a female, it's not a good sign. And then the 12th house lord is moon, and moon is already residing in the house owned by Jupiter itself, so that's another bad sign here. And Jupiter's direct aspect is on the second house. Because it co-joined with Rahu, the second house will be dynamic. And Jupiter's ninth aspect, this is very important here. The Jupiter's ninth aspect is on fourth house. Fourth house is the place where the sixth and seventh house lord Saturn is residing. So Jupiter is now having, with its ninth aspect, is looking at a most malefic planet Saturn. Along with it, Saturn is the sixth and the seventh house lord. So that itself tells you how complicated this particular chart is, and there is no possibility for this particular Netu to get married. And even if there is one, accidentally if that happens, it won't stay for a long time. Now let me start to analyze this particular chart from Chandralagana, because the Netu is a female. Generally when it comes to the marriage, possibility for a marriage, I look the chart with natal moon as the Lagna. Wherever the natal moon is there, that is the first house. So here for this particular Netu, the natal moon is in Sagittarius. So the first and the fourth house lord is Jupiter. So moon is residing in the fourth in the house owned by Jupiter. That's a very good sign. Now let's start looking at it from moon as of Lagnadipati. When moon is in the first house, moon's direct aspect is on the seventh house. So the seventh house lord is Mercury. And where is the Mercury? Mercury is residing in the sixth house from natal moon. And Mars is residing in the seventh house. So two things that tells immediately here is that when Mars is in the seventh house from natal moon, it is a Kuja dosha. That is for sure. So there will be a delay in marriage, or the Netu will never get married. Either of one will be possible. The second thing is, there is a rule that states that if the seventh house lord is in the sixth house or vice versa, either from the Rashi Lagna or the Chandralakara, there is a high possibility for the Netu to get not to get married. So here for this particular Netu, when you look at it, that's exactly what is happening. This particular Netu has, first of all, the Kuja dosha, and then the Netu has the seventh house lord residing in the sixth house. So two primary reasons from Chandralagana that can tell you that the difficulty for this particular Netu to get married. The next thing is, what is the position of moon? Which house does the moon owns? Here for this, in this chart, for moon, moon owns the 8th house. So 8th house is the Marakasthanadipati. Marakasthanadipati is residing in the first house and having a direct aspect on the 7th house. So the Kujadosha is something that tells you that if the Netu gets married, the spouse will, there is high possibility for the Netu to become a widow very quickly. That's one reason. That's something that is clearly visible here. The next thing I look at is second house. Second house is Kutumbasthana. So from moon, the second house lord is Saturn, and second house is empty, and third house lord is also Saturn. Third house is also empty. So Saturn, where is natal Saturn residing? From moon, Saturn is residing in the 12th house. Remember that whenever Saturn resides in the 12th house, or the house where moon resides, or the next house next to the moon's residence, those three houses are treated as said as not good houses. And here 12th house is a Dagdasthanama, or an inauspicious house from moon, and that's where exactly the malefic Saturn is residing, who owns the 12th second house and residing in the 12th house. So 12th house deals with pleasures of bed, and Saturn being a malefic planet and owning the second house will try its level best for the native not to get the pleasures of bed and not to start a family. This is exactly coincides with the Kujadosha that I said earlier, and the moon being the 8th house lord, the making the widow early. The native becomes, if gets married, becomes a widow very quickly, and also the 7th house lord Mercury is residing in the 6th house. 6th house is house of separations. And now comes the next one is, look at the Mars direct aspect is on moon, we know that. And Mars 8th aspect is on the second house owned by Saturn, and Saturn is residing in the house owned by Mars. So there's a strong relationship between Saturn and Mars when you are looking from the Chandralakana. And then comes another malefic planet that I look at is Rahu. Rahu is in the 4th house from natal moon, which is the Kutumba Sukhasthanamo or home life environment, and the first and the 4th house lord Jupiter is also in the 4th house. So Rahu is residing in the 4th house, co-joined with the 1st and 4th house lord, indicating that the home life environment for this particular native is completely dynamic and chaotic too. So on this, it's clearly visible that the reason why this particular native was not able to get married when I'm looking from the Chandralakana. Now let me go and analyze the same chart using the Vimsotharitasa. The native was born in 1987, so 20 years, 2007 is when the native will be 20 years old. So let's go and see what is the Vimsotharitasa after the native is 20 years old, which is here. If you look at it, the Mahadasa is Mars Mahadasa, started in November 2006 and it lasted all the way till 2013, that is 20. In 2007 she will be 20 years old. In 2013 she will be approximately 26 or 27 years old. So we have to concentrate on Mars Mahadasa for the, if to check if there is a possibility for this particular native to get married. That's the first and the foremost thing that we need to do. So let's go and look at, as I said earlier in the chart, if you look at Mars, where is the position of Mars? First, from natal moon, Mars is in the 7th house. That itself is the Kujadosha. So when you have a Kujadosha like this with the Mars, and the Mahadasa is again Mars or moon, either of them, then the possibility is very close to zero for the native to get married. Because of this reason, the chances are extremely minimal. There weren't any chances at all for this particular native to get married because of this reason. The second thing that you have to look at it is when Mars is staying in the house owned by Mercury. Let's go and look at the aspects of Mars, because it's a Mars Mahadasa is the period when the native has the first ability. The possibility for getting married is from age 20 to 27. So Mars 4th aspect is on the 2nd house from Rashi Lagna. That's also house owned by Mercury, but that's the same house that Rahu is having a direct aspect. Ketu is residing in that house. So Rahu is having a direct aspect on that house, the 2nd house from Rashi Lagna. That means Rahu is creating instability in the ability for the native to get married, to start a family, while Rahu is creating that instability. And for the native, Mars 4th aspect with a Kujadosha being there, Mars 4th aspect is again on the same 2nd house. So the ability for the native to start a family is completely out of hope. There's no hope for that. And then Mars direct aspect is on Moon, Matrukaraka, but at the same time, if you look from the by Moon, from Rashi Lagna, Moon is the 12th house lord, which is the pleasures of bed. From Chandralagana, Moon is the 8th house lord, which is secret affairs. So either of the way, it's not showing a path, it's not a good house, or to be honest with you, it is called as a Dagdasthanamo. So it's not a favorable house. So since Moon is not owning a favorable house, Moon being the Matrukaraka and the Mars is having a direct aspect on the Moon, it's the 7th aspect. Again, the native's ability to get married is became almost close to zero. The pleasures of bed is close to zero, and Matrukaraka ability to become a mother or progeny is close to zero. The next and the thing we need to do is Mars 8th aspect. Where is the Mars 8th aspect? From Rasi Lagna, Mars 8th aspect, first of all, Mars 8th aspect is on the house owned by Saturn. So it is looking at the house owned by Saturn, its bitter enemy. And at the same time, if you look at it, Saturn is residing in the house owned by Mars. That means this is the ability for the Saturn to have some sort of a friendly relationship with Mars, because Saturn is residing in the house owned by Mars, and Mars' 8th aspect is on the house owned by Saturn. So they two both have a sort of a friendly relationship. And then from Mars 8th aspect is on the Capricorn, which is the 6th house from Rashi Lagna. That means the house of separation and owned by Saturn. And from Chandralakara, it is the 2nd house, Kutumbasthanamo, and also owned by Saturn. So if you look at the way the things have been set up, only exclusively from Mars, first of all, exclusively from Mars, because that is the main period that's going to happen when the native is between 20 and 27. As I said, the chances are almost close to zero. Another most important thing that I want to tell here is there was a rule that states that if the 6th house lord is in 7th house or vice versa, whether it is from Rashi Lagna or Chandralakara, the positive outcome will be either a delay in marriage, or if had an early marriage, then the spouse will become a widow. The native has a Kuchidosha and all the other stuff that I have explained earlier. And the 7th house lord from Chandralakana is Mercury, is residing in the 6th house, and hence the delay in marriage became the high possibility. And you can see that's the reason why this particular native could not get married, at least until the end of Mars Mahadasa, which is 2013. Now the 2013 is done, the next Mahadasa is Rahu Mahadasa. So for Rahu Mahadasa, it is clearly visible. There is nothing specifically to talk about Rahu Mahadasa, because Rahu is in the 8th house, co-joined with the 8th house lord Jupiter, and from 8th house it is having a direct aspect on the 2nd house. So once the Mahadasas are started, the ability for the native to start a family is zero. It's not going to happen anymore because Rahu Mahadasa has started. And if you look at it, the Jupiter, who is the 8th house lord residing in the 8th house, is also the 5th house lord. The 5th house lord means Putrasthanamo. So the ability to, and Saturn is in the 4th house. So the ability to start the family is close to zero. The ability to have children is close to zero because of Rahu. And the Rahu Mahadasa, as long as the whole Rahu Mahadasa goes on, the chances are almost close to zero for this particular native to get married. That means all the way till 2031, I would say that the ability for this particular native to get married is After completing the Vimsottari Dasa and the main Rasi Dasa, D1 chart being analyzed, the last step that I do is, just for clarification, to reconfirm it, I go through the Bihuru Chakra Paddhati, and here is the Bihuru Chakra Paddhati for the chart for this particular need. To the first example, born in 1987. So when you look at the Bihuru Chakra Paddhati, the cycle ruler that I start looking when it comes to the possibility of marriage is Venus. Venus is the natural seventh house lord. So when the sign is the Venus, generally speaking, the possibility for the native to get married is extremely high. That means the cycle, Venus cycle, starts the day after the 24th birthday of the native and goes all the way for 12 years, that is until the day before the 37 native. So from 24 till 36, these 12 years is Venus cycle. Generally speaking, this is the right time for to check the possibility for a native to get married. If the native doesn't get married during these 12 years, the chances are extremely high for the native to remain unmarried for the remaining part. And there are some exceptions, because you have to look at the sun here, and which I'm going to, I think in this part or in the next part, I'm going to show you that exception. So let me go and first look at the Venus cycle ruler. Venus being the cycle ruler started in May 2011. Remember, the Mars Mahadasa is all the way till 2013 November. So when Venus activates the first house, which is the ninth house from Rashi Lagna, and 1 2 3 4 3 4 fifth house from 3 4 fifth house from Chandralakara, there should have been some activation. But Venus is residing in the house owned by Mars, and the Mars Mahadasa is when you see the Vimsottari Dasa, it's a Mars Mahadasa that is running, and Mars is already having a Kujadosha, as I explained earlier. So it activated the first house, nothing could happen. So the next possibility is Venus activating the second house. Even that could not happen, because we still have the Mars Mahadasa going. So we go all the way to the possibility for the Venus to activate the seventh house. Venus activating the seventh house started in May 2017. Between May 2017 and 2018, Venus activates the seventh house from Rashi Lagna, which is the house owned by Saturn in 2017 or 18, and then the seventh house from its natal position, which is the third house. Fortunately, that it owns it. So the question comes is, what was the reason why the native could not get married in 2017 or 2018? If you look at the Mahadasa, as soon as you see that the Bihuru Chakra Paddhati, as soon as you see that there is a possibility for the native to get married, immediately I go to Mahadasa to look at which planet's Mahadasa is running. The most important is the Mahadasa. Is the Mahadasa planet cooperating for that event to happen? Here, for this particular native, it's the Rahu Mahadasa that is running. It started in 2013 November. So until 2031 November, it will be Rahu Mahadasa. And Rahu is already in the 8th house, co-joined with the 8th house lord, having a direct aspect on the 2nd house. So the possibility for the native to get married is there's no possibility at all. And then comes the current period. This is Venus in 2019 till May 2020. Venus activated the 9th house. It has nothing to do with it. The 9th house is Dharmasthanamu, but that's where Venus is residing. The Dharmasthana Venus, when it activated the 9th house from Rashi Lagna, it is residing in the 9th house, the Dharmasthanamu. But unfortunately, since it was owned by Mars and there is a Kuchadosha for this particular native, the chances became close to zero. If you look at it, between May 2019 till May 2020, let's go and have a quick look at the transit planets. If you look at it, transit Rahu is co-joined with natal Mars, and it's the Rahu Mahadasa running. Transit Rahu has co-joined with natal Mars. and that means transit Rahu and natal Mars, they both are having a direct aspect on natal moon. That's not a good sign. And then transit Saturn is in Capricorn, its own house, which is the second house from natal moon. That's not a good sign. And since transit Saturn is in Capricorn, natal moon is in Sagittarius, that indicates that the native is going through the last phase of Sadeshani, and during the Sadeshani the chances for a particular for any native to get married is close to zero. So the chances, so that's the reason why the native couldn't get married before May 2020. That is the 2020, that is the current year. Then the last chance, there is one last chance, that is when Venus activates the 12th house. That's a very very important house. 12th house is pleasures of bed, and Venus is the natural 7th house lord. So whenever Venus activates the 12th house, irrespective from its natal position or Rashi Lagna, the chances are extremely high for the native to get married, any native. That is after the 35th birthday and before the 36th birthday. That is the last opportunity for a person to get married is this period. And now let's go and look at Venus. The natal Venus, when it activates the 12th house from Rashi Lagna, it's the house owned by Moon. Moon owns the 12th house. So it is activating the Matrukaraka, the house owned by Moon. But Moon is in the 5th house from Rashi Lagna, and if you look at it, Moon is exactly in the house next to the natal Saturn. There is a BSP rule, Bhurgu Sarla Paddhati rule, which states that wherever Saturn resides, he spoils the house next to its residence. So now Saturn residing in the 4th house, he owns the 6th house, he owns the 7th house. He shouts that he is the of the house where he is residing, which is the 4th house, while he says that he owns 3 houses. He will spoil the house next to his residence, which is the 5th house. So if the 4th house is hypothetically owned by Saturn, 6th and 7th house are actually owned by Saturn, and the 5th house is one that Saturn spoils. So the house that Saturn spoils is where the Matrukaraka moon is residing. And when Venus activates the 12th house from Rashi Lagna between 2022 and 2023, remember we still have the Rahu Mahadasa running over there in Vimsottari Dasa system. So the Saturn, because of that reason, that this 12th house activation will not work. And then comes from the 12th house from natal position. From the natal position, Venus natal position, the 12th house is the 8th house from Rashi Lagna and the 4th house from Chandralakana. And that's a good sign to say that, because it is a 4th house from Chandralakana, it's a good sign. 8th house from Rashi Lagna is a bad sign. So the good and bad got balanced off, written off. So the good plus minus bad, zero, nothing. And then comes to add further, in that house, the 12th house from natal is the house owned by Jupiter, and Jupiter is residing there. But unfortunately, Rahu is also co-joined over there, and Rahu and Jupiter, they both are having a direct aspect on the 2nd house from Rashi Lagna, and Rahu Mahadasa is running. I think by 2022 and 2023, if I remember correctly, transit Rahu will be coming to Aries. That means that's exactly the place where Venus is residing. So Venus, when it activates the 12th house from its natal position, it is activating the house where natal Rahu is residing. But at the same time, transit Rahu is co-joined with Venus, and the Rahu Mahadasa is still going on. So overall, for this particular native, the chance even between 2022 and 23 is almost, I should say it as close to 100%. But since house that it is activating, since it is a Rahu that is having a direct aspect on the 2nd house, and the house that is activating where transit Rahu is in with natal Venus, and natal Rahu is there in the activated house, Rahu doesn't tell you exactly what might happen. So some surprises might happen, and the 7th house lord is Saturn. So it is extremely difficult to tell that any miracle happens. If so, what type it is. But 99.9% of the time, the chances for this native to get all the way until 2023 is close to zero. Let me take the second example for this presentation. The native was born on 4th July 1982. So let me start for the ascendant, the Lagna. The Lagna is Aquarius. So the Lagnadipati is Saturn, and the second house from Rashi Lagna. I'm talking about the Rashi Lagna. From the second house from Rashi Lagna is empty. The third is empty. The fourth house is Venus is the house lord. Venus is residing in the fourth house, and Mercury is co-joined with Venus. Mercury is the fifth house lord. So the fourth house lord and the fifth house lord are co-joined in the fourth house. That's a very important point to note when you're looking at any native's chart for a possibility to get about the predicting the possibility of getting married is the fourth and fifth house lord here. Let's assume that, and then the fifth house. Sun is residing in the fifth house, and Rahu is residing in the fifth house. That's fine. Sixth house. Moon is the sixth house lord. Moon is the sixth house. The Matrakaraka moon is in the sixth house and residing in the 11th house. So when Rahu is residing in the fifth house, its direct aspect is on the 11th house. That's exactly where moon is residing. Keep that in mind. And then the seventh house lord is Sun. So, and Sun is now residing in the fifth house, co-joined with Rahu, and natal Rahu and natal Sun, they both are having a direct aspect on Matrakaraka moon, and moon is the sixth house lord. Sixth house is house of separation, and the Matrakaraka itself is the lord of the house of separation, for separation. And then comes the seventh house is empty. Sun is the lord, but it is empty. Then comes the eighth house. Mercury is the lord of the fifth and eighth houses, and in eighth house what you see is Mars and Saturn, the Lagnadipati. That's a very important thing. The Lagnadipati and the 12th house lord Mercury and Saturn are both residing in the eighth house, and Saturn, the Lagnadipati, has co-joined with the third house lord. That's nothing to worry. And the ninth house you got Jupiter. Jupiter is the second house lord. And then you go all the way to the 11th house where you got the Matrakaraka moon. The 12th house is empty. Now that I had seen, we had gone through the house lords and the houses where they are residing, let's go and look at the most important, with the assumption that the time of birth is correct. What I do is that the next thing I do is go and look at the planets' inclinations to see whether the planets are in any Rasi Sandhi or not. Here, when I assume that the time of birth is correct, the only planet that is in Rasi Sandhi is Moon, Matrakaraka, and this is a female chart. So Matrakaraka being in a Rasi Sandhi is not a good sign. It has its own side effects. Either the native, because it's a Matrakaraka, either the native will have a delay in immediately we can say that the native, there is a possibility for the native to have a delayed marriage or unable to become a mother. So these are the two options whenever the moon is in a Rasi Sandhi, and depending upon where it is, you can expand it. Here the native, if you look at moon for this particular native, it is in the 11th house from Rasi Lagana. 11th house is house of desires for Matrakaraka, and it is a 6th house lord. So because of the Rasi Sandhi, let's assume that it is in Scorpio, which is the 10th house. If moon is in Scorpio, then it's going to have a direct aspect on the fourth, on Venus and Mercury, and from Chandralakara, Venus is the 7th house lord and also the 12th house lord, which is a very good sign. And but at the same time, when moon is in Scorpio and having a direct aspect on Venus and Mercury. Mercury is the 8th house lord and the 11th house lord too. A 8th house lord co-joining with the 7th house lord in the 7th house from Chandralakara, any Lagna generally, is not a good sign. And then if we assume moon as it is in Sagittarius the way you see on the screen, then moon is having a direct aspect on the 7th house where Rahu is residing, okay, and sun is the 8th house lord. So moon is having a direct aspect on Rahu and the 8th house lord. At the same time, the 7th house lord is Mercury, who is going to, and he is that Mercury is in the 6th house, co-joined with the 6th house lord. So the 6th house, 7th house lord is co-joined with the 6th house lord in 6th house, and the 8th house and the 9th moon itself is the 8th house lord, and sun, the 9th house lord sun, is in the 7th house co-joined with Rahu. So either of the way, whether you take the moon from assume the moon to be in Scorpio, or you assume the moon to be in Sagittarius because of Rasi Lagna, either of the way, the planetary positions are not in a positive way to say that there is a possibility, at least a little bit of possibility there is for this native to get married. So overall, at least for 99% of the chances for this native to get married is 99% of the chances for the native to get married is close. Now that we had gone through the lords and that their houses they own it, let me go pick up the important house lords and look at their aspects. First of all, Saturn is the Lagnadipati and the 12th house lord. 12th house deals with pleasures of bed. So let's start with Saturn. Saturn is in the 8th house from Rashi Lagna, and its third aspect is on the 10th house from Rashi Lagna. It's not a good, that's okay, no need to worry about it. And the direct aspect is on the 2nd house from Rasi Lagna, which is the Kutumba Sthanamu. And then the 10th aspect is on the 5th house from Rasi Lagna. This is very important here. The 10th aspect is on the 5th house from Rasi Lagna. That's where you have Rahu residing. And the 7th house lord, sun, is residing. So when Saturn is having a 10th aspect on the 5th house from Rasi Lagna, it's not only looking at Rahu, but it is also looking at its bitter enemy and the 7th house lord, sun. So the Lagnadipati is now having a big fight with the 7th house lord. Sorry, let me rephrase it. The 7th house lord is a bitter enemy to the Lagnadipati. That's the first thing. And then the Lagnadipati's 10th aspect is on the house where his bitter enemy's 7th house lord, sun, is residing. That is enough to say that for this particular native, getting married is a challenge. This itself is enough. Now let's go and look at the 2nd house lord, which is Jupiter. Jupiter is in the 9th house. That's not very tough to worry about. And Jupiter's 5th aspect is on Rashi, like the 1st house. That's what, and no planet is there. Jupiter direct aspect is on the 3rd house. No planet is there. But Jupiter's 9th aspect is again on the 5th house from Rashi Lagna, where Rahu and the 7th house lord, sun, are residing. So the Lagnadipati Saturn's 10th aspect is on the 5th house. Look at it, how many planets are looking at the same house where Rahu and the 7th house lord are residing. Lagnadipati 10th aspect is on 5th house where Rahu and the 7th house lord, sun, is residing. Jupiter, the 2nd house lord's 9th aspect is again on the 5th house where Rahu and the 7th house lord, sun, is residing. And the 6th house lord, house lord for separation, is Moon, Matakaraka, and Moon is having a direct aspect again on the 5th house where Rahu and the 7th house lord, sun, are residing. and Saturn is also the 12th house lord. 12th house lord means the pleasures of bed. So you have seen here the second house lord, the ability to get married, to start a family. Jupiter is the second house lord. Second house deals with the kutumbasthanam, or the ability to start a family, is now having a aspect, ninth aspect on the seventh house lord Sun and Rahu. The 12th house lord is Saturn, which talks about the pleasures of bed, is also having the same aspect, aspecting the same planet. And 6th house lord, the planet that is responsible for getting separated, for marital discord or getting separated, and also is the planet that is noted as Matrakaraka moon. A moon is also is aspecting the same house where the malefic Rahu and the 7th house lord Sun is residing. Remember, 7th house sometimes is also called as the Marakasthanam, and Sun is also a malefic, considered to be a malefic. So Marakasthanadipati is Sun, and that itself is now residing in the 5th house. So when you look at the three important planets, you don't even need to look at more than, because the three strong planets are the Saturn and the Sun being the 7th house lord, Saturn being the Lagnadipati, second and the 12th house lord, and being the second house lord. These three houses, when we look at these three house lords, it is enough to say that the possibility for this particular native to get married is almost close to zero. Since it is a female chart, there are two other things that I look at. It is one, the possibility for a Kujadosha is the first one, and then from Chandralagana, how is the chart looking at? Is there any possibility for the native to get married when viewed from Chandralakara? These are the two additional things that I do it for a female chart, in a female chart. First of all, from natal moon, Mars is in the 10th house from natal moon, so there's no Kujadosha, fine. And Mars is in the 5th house from natal Venus, no Kujadosha. So that's a possible good sign. Good sign is that this particular native, after having so many other problems with the planets, the good thing is this native do not have a Kujadosha, but still the chances for her to get married is almost close to zero. So let me go and look at from Chandralagana. We know that moon is from Rashi Lagna, moon is a 6th house lord residing in the 11th house. 6th house is the house of separations, 11th house is house of desires. So, and natal moon is getting a direct aspect from Rahu. So when it comes to the house of desires, the chances are close to zero, I should say that way. Okay, from moon, the second house lord is Saturn, third and fourth, fifth. Sixth house lord is Venus, and the 7th house lord is Mercury. If you look at it, just like in the previous chart, example 1, even in this chart also from Chandralakana, the 7th house lord Mercury is co-joined with the 6th house lord Venus in the 6th house itself. And there is a rule that states that if the 7th house lord is in 6th house or vice versa, the chances are very high for the native either for a delayed marriage, or if it's an early marriage, will become a widow. And here looks like this particular native, because of all the other planetary combinations that I explained earlier, looks like for this particular native it is a delayed marriage. So because of the 6th house, 7th house lord residing in the 6th house co-joined with the 6th house lord, the chances are a delayed marriage, that is for sure. And the second thing is Rahu is in the 7th house from natal, from moon, and that itself tells you that thus when it is Rahu is in the 7th house, whether it is Chandralagna or Rashi Lagna, the chances are extremely high for a delayed marriage. Let's go and look at the same chart, second example chart, and look at the Vimsottari Dasa for this particular native. In earlier I explained the lords, the houses, and now using the D1 chart. And now let me go and look at the Vimsottari Dasa here. Since the native was born in 1982, approximately from 2000, around 2006 or 2007, the native will be 24 years old. So we got to look at who is the Mahadasa, what planets Mahadasa is there starting 2006 or 2007. Fortunately for this particular native, Sun Mahadasa started in 2008, that is approximately 24 or 25 years old, and Sun is the 7th house lord. Basically, whenever a person sees this chart and come to a conclusion that since it is a Sun Mahadasa is running, Sun is the 7th house lord, they assume that this is the, and from Moon, Sun is in the 7th house, so they may rush for concluding that there is a high possibility for this particular native to get married during this period, during the Sun Mahadasa. So let's assume that there is a possibility and figure it out what was the reason for her not to get married. First and the foremost, Sun is co-joined with natal Rahu. Rahu always creates uncertainty. So when the 7th house lord is co-joined with Rahu, the characteristics of the 7th house will be uncertain. So it's not clear. Because of this combination, we cannot exactly say whether the native will get married or not. So there is a if statement, there is a 50% chance for the native not to get married because of this combination. The second thing is, yes, Moon is directly having a 7th from Moon. Yes, Sun is in the 7th house from Moon, that's true. But Moon, even though Moon is a Matrukaraka, Moon owns the 6th house. 6th house is house of separations. So when the Lord is Moon is the reason for getting the separated, for marital discord, the chances for such a person, for Moon to activate the possibility of for the native to get married is almost close to zero. So you have seen that even though the Mahadasa is cooperating, even though Mahadasa is cooperating here, the planetary combinations does not cooperate. In the chart 1, it's the planetary combinations that cooperated and the Rahu Mahadasa did not cooperate. Here it's exactly the inverse of chart 1. Another thing that you have to look here is from Moon, because it's a female chart, from Moon the 2nd house lord is very important. Lord is Kutumbasthanamu, or the ability to start a family, and that one is Saturn. Saturn is the 2nd house lord, and from natal Moon the 12th house lord, 12th house is pleasures of bed, and that is owned by Mars. And so when you look at it, Saturn, the 2nd house lord from Moon, and Mars, the 12th house lord from Moon, they both are co-joined in the 10th house from Moon, but it is the 8th house from Destiny, Chandralakara, and 8th house is a Margasthanamu, or not a good house. So because of that, another reason, the native mind was not willing to get married because of Saturn and Mars being co-joined in this place. Then the next comes is in 2014 you have the Moon Mahadasa. Already I have explained how the Moon, the 6th house lord, is slowing down the ability for the native to get married and refusing for the ability for the native to start a family, and not cooperating for the ability to have the pleasures of bed. So in the Moon Mahadasa all the way till 2024, which is the Moon Mahadasa, the chances are almost close to zero. So let's go and look at the Moon Mahadasa a bit in detail, because that is the future right now. This is year 2020 July. So when you look at 2020 July, the Saturn Antardasa, Moon Mahadasa and Saturn Antardasa ends in August 2020. So the chances are close to zero, forget about it. Then next comes is Mercury. Mercury is the 7th house lord from Moon, and Mercury is fifth house lord from Rashi Lagna, but Mercury is also the eighth house lord from Rashi Lagna, and Mercury is co-joined with the fourth house lord Venus and the natural seventh house lord too. So between August 2020 to 2022 January, that means from August, these 5 months in year 2020 and 12 months in year 2021, 5 plus 12, 17. In these 17 months, the NATO might see some sort of a indication that there's a possibility to get married. That marriage, first of all, is a challenge to get married. Even if the marriage does happen, if you go further down to the other dasas, the moon Mahadasa, the sixth house lord Mahadasa, so separation is sure to happen. And then the transit planet right now until 21 January, transit Saturn will be in the second house from moon. That means the NATO is going through Sadeshani. So any chances, if there are any chances, that can happen only when transit Saturn goes to Aquarius. By the time transit Saturn goes to Aquarius in January 2021, it is going to have a direct aspect on the house owned by Sun, its bitter enemy. And so from in the whole year 2021, transit Saturn will be having a direct aspect on the seventh house Sun, and natal Saturn's 10th aspect is on 5th house from Rashi Lagna, where natal Sun and natal Rahu are residing. So the chances further gets reduced. So the chances, even though the Mercury gives the ability for the NATO to get married either before December 2021, but coming from January 2021, it's not going to happen, because transit Saturn will be in the NATO is going through Sadeshani until December 2020, and then once transit Saturn enters Aquarius, it will not let it happen. Another thing is from September 2020, transit Rahu will be going to Taurus, that is the fourth house from Rashi Lagna, and remember that is the sixth house from Chandralakara. So sixth house is house of separation. So after September 2020, if the NATO gets married, that's a if big this possibility is close to zero, but accidentally for some reason or the other, if the NATO gets married, once Rahu enters the sixth house from Chandralagana, it will be co-joining with the seventh house lord Mercury from Chandralagana and the sixth house lord Chandralagana, and then the NATO will be, and already by the time from September 2020, probably the NATO might have some sort of a difficulties until December 2020, and from January 2021, before December 2021, the NATO will be getting separated. So the chances here is that the possibility for her to get married is close to zero, and for some miracle happens, and if the NATO gets married, the NATO will be getting separated at the most by I should say it as by end of December 20. Just to make sure that whatever the prediction that I said earlier, to counter verify it, I use the Behuru Chakra Paddhati. Behuru Chakra Paddhati usually gives you the possibilities for a 12-month duration, and at least that would be helpful for us while predicting, to know within a 12-month duration, when if is it a possibility is there, then we can go deeper using the Vimsotari Dasa and then the transit planets. So here for this particular NATO, if you take 4th July 1982 as the date of birth, the Venus cycle starts in June 2006 and it goes all the way June 2020, till June 2018. The whole Venus cycle, nothing has happened. The NATO is still unmarried. So there's nothing more to talk about the Behuru Chakra Paddhati until June 2018. Remember earlier I mentioned that when you are looking at the Behuru Chakra Paddhati, there is an exceptional case to look for the next cycle ruler Sun for a possibility of getting married. This is that exceptional. Why this particular need to become exceptional is because Sun is the 7th house lord from Rashi Lagna, and from Chandralakara Sun is residing in the 7th house. So this is an exceptional, these are the exceptional cases. So we go into Bihuru Chakra Paddhati to look at Sun as a cycle ruler, first and the second houses. That means Sun activates the first house between June 2018 till June 2019. That is the 7th house from Chandralagana, and nothing has happened, because that's a period when transit Rahu has co-joined with natal Rahu, and uncertainty is extremely high. So in reality, the native might have was not sure whether she will get married or not, and the activities were either have initiated and have stopped due to some reason or the other. The next one, Sun activating the second house. This is very important. Sun, whenever it activates the second house from Rashi Lagna, it is the Kutumba Sthanamu. Since Sun is the 7th house lord, when a 7th house lord activates the second house from Rashi Lagna or Chandra Lagna, that's a high possibility for the native to get married. So from Rashi Lagna second house, when it activates the second house, it is the house is empty, fortunately, and the house is owned by Jupiter. Jupiter is in the 9th house Dharmasthanamu. But the unfortunate part of here is Saturn, wherever he resides, he spoils the characteristics of the house next to its residence. And here Saturn is residing in the 8th house from Rashi Lagna, so it spoils the Dharmasthanamu. And that's exactly where the second house lord is residing. So the ability for the native to start a family got spoiled because of this reason. And when Sun activates the second house from its natal position, if you look at it, it is the Matrukaraka owned by Moon, which is the Matrukaraka, but unfortunately that's the 6th house, house of separations, and that is from Rashi Lagna. And when you look from Chandra Lagna, that is the 8th house, Marakasthanamu. So Sun, when it activated the second house before June 2020, that is the current period, even then nothing could have happened because of these reasons. And keep in mind, while Sun is activating the first and second houses, transit Rahu is still co-joined with natal Rahu and natal Sun in Gemini, and transit Saturn is in the second house from natal Moon. That means the native is still going through the Sadeshani period, and because of that reason, the chances for the native to get married became close to zero. Okay, now let's go and look at the third example, I should say that way. The date of birth was April 17th, 1984. If you look at the birth chart, the very first thing that you see is that I usually look for is the Lagnadipati or the first house lord. And here for this particular native, the Lagnadipati is Saturn, and the 12th house lord is also Saturn. So when it comes to the possibility of getting married, or when it comes to marital discord, 12th house plays a vital role. And here the 12th house lord and the first house lord is Saturn. Then let's go and look at the second. And by the by, where is Saturn residing? Saturn is residing in the 10th house from Rashi Lagna, which is in Libra. And remember, in Libra, Saturn is exalted. So that means the Lagnadipati and the 12th house lord is exalted. Just keep that in mind. The second one, the second house lord is Jupiter. Jupiter is in the 11th house from Rashi Lagna. Of course, Jupiter is the lord of the second and the 11th house, and residing in the 11th house. 11th house is the house of desires. So that's a very positive sign for this particular native when it comes to the house of desires and the second house. And when you look at the second house, Venus, the natural 7th house lord, is residing. Also, Venus is the 4th house lord and the 10th house lord. Here we'll just look at the 4th house lord because we are talking about possibility for the native to get married, or so the 4th house is important. So the Venus is the natural 7th house lord and the 4th house lord, and residing in the 2nd house from Rashi Lagna. That's those are three important things to keep it there. And in the 3rd house, the 3rd house is not important. Let's go to the 4th house. 4th house lord is Venus, as I told you earlier. And what you look here is in 4th house you have the Venus is the 9th house lord, not the 10th house lord. I forgot it. 12, 11, 10, 9th. And Saturn is residing in the 9th house, the Dharmasthanamo. So yeah, in 4th house Rahu is residing. So by default Rahu creates uncertainty in the house where it resides, and also the house that it aspects. This is by default the characteristics of Rahu from a high level perspective. So here Rahu is residing in the 4th house, which is the Sukhasthanamo or Hosthanamo or home life environment. So this tells you that the native's home life environment before marriage, or before marriage in her with her parents, and after marriage with her in-laws and husband and other in-law family members, the home life environment is, there's so much of uncertainty in that home life environment. The 5th house lord is Mercury. Mercury is co-joined with the Sun in what you call Aries. We'll talk about Sun later. And the 6th house lord, this is very important again. The 6th house lord, oh by the way, Mercury is the 5th and 8th house lords. Oh gosh. So Mercury, the 8th house lord, here the most important thing is the 8th house lord is the Marakasthanadipati, is co-joined with Sun. Sun is the 7th house lord. That's the most drawback, one of the biggest drawback is that one. The next one drawback is Moon. Moon is the 6th house lord. 6th house deals with separation, and Moon is the Matrukaraka. Just like I remember in the example 2 also, Moon was a Matrukaraka, is the 6th house lord. Just like that, even in this example also, Moon is the Matrukaraka. Moon is the 6th house lord. That's a very bad sign. It is co-joined, it is residing in the 9th house, the Dharmasthanamo. It's a moderate, indicates moderate, and but unfortunately it has co-joined with the house lord 12th and 1st house lord Saturn. If you look at it, Saturn is exalted here. So the Moon is co-joined with an exalted malefic planet Saturn, who is the Lagnadipati and the 12th house lord. 12th house deals with the pleasures of come to the marital discord, or looking for the possibility for a native to get married. So that's the biggest this is the biggest drawback, one of the biggest drawback. The next is 7th house lord. Sun is the 7th house lord. Sun is residing in the 3rd house from Rashi Lagna. That's no issue there, but it is co-joined with the two drawbacks with the 7th house lord. The first one is Sun is co-joined with the 8th house lord Mercury. A 7th house lord is co-joined with the 8th house lord Mercury. That's a very bad sign. And Sun reading in Aries is exalted. So the 7th house lord is exalted. Look here, the 12th house lord is exalted, 7th house lord is also exalted, and the 12th house lord is having a direct aspect with the 7th house lord, and the 12th and the 7th house lords Sun and Saturn are bitter enemies. So the 7th house and the 12th house, they do not go to hand in hand. And for when you talk about the 7th house possibility of getting married, the importance of 12th house plays a very vital role, as I told earlier. And here the lords are bitter enemies. They are looking at each other. Unfortunately, they both are in exalted position. So the chances are, but just by looking at the house lords and the place where they are, in the houses where they are residing, That itself tells you that the chances for this particular native to get married, with the assumption that the time of birth is correct. Let's go and look a little bit deeper into the birth chart, the inclination of these planets. If you look at it, I just do that to see if there are any planets there are in Rasi Sandhi. If they are in Rasi Sandhi, then I look at those planets, where they're residing, which houses they own, and of course which planets do they aspect, which houses or which planets do they aspect. The first and the foremost, the Lagna is 4 degrees Aquarius. That means the Lagna itself is in a Rasi Sandhi. So the natives, when the Lagna is in a Rasi Sandhi, it is a clear indication that the native will not have a definite destiny, or the native's life is completely filled with lots of uncertainties in different parts of his or her life. That's the biggest drawback to have Lagna in Rasi Sandhi. The next one that I see in Rasi Sandhi is the second one. Actually, there are 3 total. So the second one is, oh gosh, is Sun. Remember, Sun is the 7th house lord. If the 7th house lord is in Rasi Sandhi, that means it is between the 2nd house and the 3rd house. If it is in the 2nd house, it's very fortunate. Oh, no. Okay, I will talk about if it is, it's not good even in the 2nd house. I will talk in the, when we are talking from the Chandralakana, it is not good to be in the 2nd house. And if it is in the current house Aries, it is in exalted position. That means it is co-joined with the 8th house lord Mercury and having a direct aspect from Moon, the Matrakaraka, the 6th house lord, and the sun's biggest enemy Saturn, who is the Lagnadipati and 12th house lord. So Sun positioning in Aries itself is bad, and to add further, it is in Rasi Sandhi. The third one that I would like to talk about is Mars. Mars is also in Rasi Sandhi. So let's do this way. Mars, if Mars is assumed to be in Libra, the previous house, then it is co-joined with the Moon, Saturn, and having a direct aspect on the 3rd house, where the 7th house lord and the 8th house lord are residing. That's a bad sign. So if we assume Mars being in Scorpio the way you see in the chart, then Mars is having a direct aspect from Rahu, looking the 4th house and the 5th house together, and Mars 4th aspect is on the 1st house. So the violent planet is now looking at the 1st house, the 4th house and the 5th house. This is not a good sign either. So overall, when you look at the inclinations of these planets to see how this Rasi Sandhi is, you can see a place at Rasi Sandhi, planets being in Rasi Sandhi is playing a very important role here when it comes to the ability for this native to get married. Having gone through the house lords and their positions, and then the inclination of the planets, let me go through the aspects of important planets. Here the important planets by default is the Lagnadipati. Lagnadipati and the 12th house lord is Saturn, is exalted. So Saturn's 3rd aspect is on Sagittarius, which is the 11th house from Rashi Lagna. That means an exalted malefic Saturn is looking at the house of desires. So it will surely make sure that the native doesn't get her desires fulfilled. In general, the desires are in general, whatever the type of it is. And since Jupiter is residing, the 11th house lord is, and 2nd house lord Jupiter is residing, so probably the desires for the native to start a family will not be full because of the Saturn's 3rd aspect, the malefic Saturn's 3rd aspect on that house and the house lord. Then comes Saturn's direct aspect. Saturn's direct aspect is on the third house, where seventh house Lord Sun and the eighth house Lord Mercury are residing. That's not at all a good side to talk about. So enough. And Saturn is exalted, and Sun is also exalted here. And then the 10th house, 10th aspect. 12, 11, 10. This is very important here. Saturn's, I remember all the three aspects of Saturn. When you look at it, that will immediately that the chances for this particular native to get married is not close to zero, is 100% zero. So because Saturn's third aspect is on the 11th house, house of desires, where the 11th house Lord Jupiter is residing. Jupiter also owns the second house, which is the Kutumbasthanamu. So the Kutumbasthanadipati and the house of desires Lord got spoiled by a malefic planet's aspect, and that to an exalted malefic planet's aspect. An exalted malefic planet's direct aspect is on the third house, where an exalted seventh house Lord is residing, and the seventh house Lord Sun is a bitter enemy to the exalted malefic planet Saturn. And also exalted malefic planet Saturn is having a direct aspect on the 8th house Lord Mercury. And now comes the third important aspect to look at, is the 10th aspect of Saturn. The 10th aspect of Saturn is directly on the 6th house. 6th house is house of separations. So now Saturn is having a third aspect on the 11th house, where the 11th and 2nd house Lord is residing. Saturn's direct aspect is on the and the 8th house Lord. As if that is not sufficient, now Saturn's 10th aspect is on the 6th house, the house of separations. And to add further, exalted malefic Saturn is co-joined with the 6th house Lord and the Matrakaraka moon in Libra. So just by looking at the Saturn's aspects, after going through the planet's positions, it's enough to tell that the chances for this particular native to get married is close to zero, or I should say it as is 100% zero. We had talked about the chart from Rashi Lagna, which is the native's destiny. Now let's go and look at, since it is a female chart, like I said earlier, for a female chart, after looking at the Divan chart or the Rashi chart with Rashi Lagna, I always look for the same chart from Chandralakara. Since it's a female chart, first and foremost I do is to look at the Kuja doshas. The first thing, position of Mars from Moon. From Moon, there are two things. If Mars is in Rashi Sandhi, we all know it. If Mars is assumed to be in Libra, then from Moon, Mars is in the first house, which is a Kuja dosha for default. If Mars is assumed to be in the Scorpio, that means from Moon, Mars is in the second house, which is also a Kuja dosha. So either of the position of Mars, whether Libra or Scorpio, from Moon there is a Kuja dosha, and that is something that should never be for a female chart, particularly when it comes to the positioning of, when it comes to the Kuja dosha with respect to Moon. And then the second way of looking for the Kuja dosha is through Venus, because Venus is the natural 7th house lord, and Venus plays a vital role when it comes to a person's marriage and marital life after marriage. From Venus, natal Venus, if you look at it, it is in 12, 11, 10, 9, 9. From natal Venus, Mars is in the 9th house, Dharmasthanamu. So if you take Venus as the Lagna, wherever Venus is there, if you consider that to be the Lagna, the first house, then Mars is in the Dharmasthanamu, 9th house. It's not a Kuja dosha, but it's something that needs to be considered while referring the native for a marriage. The next thing is Chandralakara. So Moon, we know, is in Libra. So if you take from Chandralakara, if you take Libra as the Lagna, first house, then the exalted Saturn, who is the lord of the 4th and 5th house, is in first house. That is a very bad sign. And then from Moon, is in the first house, and it is having a and the seventh house will be Aries. So from moon, the seventh house is Aries. The exalted Saturn is looking at the exalted sun, its bitter enemy, along with Mercury. And here from Chandralagana, Mercury becomes the 12th house lord. And the second thing is 12th means, sun becomes the 7th house of desires. So either of the way, whether you look from Rashi Lagna or Chandralagana, what you see is the house of desires, the 12th house and the second house. These three houses are completely spoiled. And also another thing that I would like to add is when from moon, if you look at the position of Rahu, it is in the 8th house. That's a very bad sign. So Rahu residing in the 8th house from moon is having a direct aspect on the second house from moon, which is owned by Mars, and Mars, the owner of that house, Mars, is in the second house itself. So even when you look from moon, the chart doesn't show any indication for the native to get married. So the possibility is extremely high for this particular native to remain unmarried for the remaining part of the life. Having gone through the whole D1 chart analysis, let's go and see if, even though we notice that in D1 chart, based on the houses that the planets are residing, the houses that they are aspecting, even though we went through and found out that the chances are close to zero for this particular native to get married, let's see if there is any hope when it comes from, when viewed from Vimsuttari Dasa, because Dasa ruler can change whatever the predictions that we can say about D1 chart. If the Dasa ruler is cooperating for the event to happen or not, let's go and look at it. First, in 1984 means in 2004. By 2004 the native will be 20 years old. So 2004 plus 4, 2008. Let's try to see what is the Mahadasa starting 2008 or anything about 2008. For this particular native, unfortunately, the Saturn Mahadasa started in 2002 and it will go away all the way till 2021. So from 2008 all the way till 2021, when the native is in the prime age to get married, it's the Saturn Mahadasa. Remember, Saturn is exalted. Saturn is co-joined with the 6th house lord. When you look from Rashi Lagna, Saturn is co-joined with the Matrakaraka moon. Saturn is the 1st and 12th house lord. Saturn, the exalted malefic Saturn, is having a direct aspect on exalted 7th house lord Sun, who is his bitter enemy. That concludes that the possibility for this particular native to get married during the Saturn period is close to zero. After going through the D1 chart, the inclinations of the planets and the Vimsuttari Dasa, the last thing that I do is, with just a ray of hope, hoping that is there any other thing that I missed it before I conclude, before I come to my conclusion. That the one thing that I do is I look at the Behuru Chakra Paddhati, and here for this particular native, the third example, the native was born in 1984. So if you look at the Behuru Chakra Paddhati, the Venus cycle ruler Venus will start somewhere in 8. That's when the native will be 24-25 years old approximately. So somewhere in 2008 is when that it started. And we know that the Vimsuttari Dasa, in the Vimsuttari Dasa, the exalted Laganadipati, the 1st and the 12th house lord Saturn's Mahadasa started in 2004 or 5, something like that, and it's going all the way till 2021. So if you look at here, the Venus cycle ruler started in 2008, will go until 2020. So the whole Venus cycle ruler, when Venus is the cycle ruler for the whole 12 years, it's the Saturn Mahadasa running for the native. And it's normally Saturn Mahadasa is not that bad for any for some of them, not for all of them, for some of them. But here for this particular Natal, because the Saturn is exalted, that's the most important part here is Saturn is exalted Agnadipati. It has co-joined with the Matrakaraka, and it is having a direct aspect on the 7th house lord who is exalted and also is a bitter enemy for him. So naturally the Saturn will do its level best to make sure that the Natal does not get married at least until 2021. Now, so since we know that it's not, the possibility is close to zero until 2021, let's go and start looking in the Behuru Chakra Paddhati. What is there after 2021? The cycle ruler Sun will start from April 2020. Remember, I told you that there are some exceptions for in Behuru Chakra Paddhati where I look at the cycle ruler after Sun as a cycle ruler while predicting for the possibility for a Natal to get married. This is one of that. The reason for this exemption, this being the exemption, is Sun is the 7th house lord and exalted. So I took the Sun as a cycle ruler, and let me start looking at the possibilities. Until April 2021, Sun activates the first house, that is the house where it is residing, which is the 7th house, and also the first house from Rashi Lagna, which is owned by Saturn. So when Sun activates, it's the house where it is residing. It doesn't work out anyway because Natal transits, exalted Saturn, the first house lord, is looking. At the same time, when it activates the first house, it is activating the house owned by its enemy and also having a direct aspect with the enemy, so nothing is going to happen. So the possibilities go for the next one. Sun activating the 2nd house from its natal position. This is where when Sun activates a second position from its natal position, 2nd house from its natal position, that means it is activating the 4th house from Rashi Lagna. Keep in mind, it's the 4th house from Rashi Lagna and the 8th house from Chandralakana. And in that house you have Rahu residing there, and when Rahu is residing, it's completely uncertainty. The uncertainty, it's filled with uncertainty, that period, and that means from 2021 till 2022. That period is completely filled with uncertainty. The chances seems to be like there is a chance for the Natal to get married, but for some reason or the other, for some unknown reasons which you cannot expect it or plan for that unknown problems coming up, there are two things that will happen. Either marriage will be, whatever the marriage that was planned will not happen, that is because Sun activated the 2nd house, or remember from Moon it is the 8th house, so either some sort of a unfortunate event happening in the family, Marakasthanamu and Marakasthanadhipatis, and Rahu is the terminator, and that will indirectly make stops the possibility of the Natal getting married. This is not a good sign from 2021 to 2022. To add further, between 2021 and 2022, transit Rahu will be in the 4th house to co-join with natal Rahu. So the uncertainty of what might happen now got doubled. It got amplified. Also, from 21 till April 21 to April 2022, transit Saturn will be in the 1st house looking directly at the 7th house. See, 7th house means the Kalatar Salmo. So now transit Saturn is in its own house, the 1st house, looking directly at the 7th house. 7th house is empty. Natal Saturn is exalted in and having a direct aspect in the house where the 7th house lord, its bitter enemy, exalted Sun, is residing. So the chances again, Sun, even though it activates the 2nd house, it can't do it. The event will not happen. The event might look as if it is going to be happening, and some unfortunate situation arises which is hard to predict, and then immediately the event what is supposed to happen will be stopped. So until April 2022, the possibility for this particular native to get married is as close to zero at this point. This is the fourth and the last example in this video presentation. Then this female native was born on 16th July 1982 in Mathura, 1745 hours. And so when I drew the chart, the very first thing that I noticed here is, where is the Lakna? The Lakna is Sagittarius, and from Sagittarius, if that when Sagittarius is the first house, I know try to look at what is which planets are there in that first house, and it is Ketu. When Ketu is in the first house, that indicates that Rahu is in the seventh house. It was in part 5 of my Vivah Vilamb series. I had exclusively taken two examples, two female natives examples. Both of them were unmarried, and I think for both of them either Rahu is in the first house or the seventh house. So as soon as you see Rahu either in the first house or the seventh house, the very first thing that I do is to take with a grain of salt that the possibility for this particular native to get married is, I would say it's 50%. There's no chance, only the 50% chance is there, and the remaining that 50% of possibility is based upon the other planet they are, and how strong are the benefic planets and how weak are the malefic planets. Here the first house, as I said, Ketu is in the first house. Jupiter is the Lagnadipati, and Jupiter is in Libra. That's fine. Just leave it there because I'll come there later. The second house, second and third house lord is Saturn. Second house is empty. The third house is empty. Oh, by the way, Jupiter is also the fourth house lord. Fourth house is empty. Fifth house is empty. So we go all the way to the sixth house. Sixth house lord is Venus, and in sixth house you have the eighth house lord Moon. So when the eighth house lord is a Matrukaraka, like I said in example 3, eighth house lord, sorry, even the Matrukaraka is the sixth house lord in example 3. Here in example, eighth house lord is Matrukaraka, and Matrukaraka Moon is residing in the sixth house, and the sixth house lord is Venus. Let's wait for a second. Now let's go to the seventh house. This is the very important point to note here. In seventh house, what we see is the seventh house lord Mercury is residing in the seventh house. Rahu is residing in the seventh house, and the sixth house lord Venus is also residing in the seventh house. Remember, in one of the examples that I mentioned earlier, there is a rule that states that either from Rashi Lagna or Chandralakara, if it's in seventh house or vice versa, one of the two possibilities is sure to happen. Either the native, there will be a delay in the marriage for the native, or if the native had an early marriage, then the native will become a widow. Here looks like there is a delay in the marriage, so that's one reason why. First of all, that's one of the main reasons why there is a delay in marriage for this particular native is the sixth house lord residing in the seventh house. The seventh house lord is residing in the seventh house. Rahu is residing in the seventh house. You take, then that is one primary reason for a delay in marriage for this particular native. The second primary reason is the eighth house lord Matrukaraka Moon is residing in the sixth house. At this point we'll stop here. Let's go to the next one. What's the eighth house? The ninth house lord Sun, Dharmasthanadipati Ravi, Sun is residing in the eighth house. That's not a good sign, but that's okay. And then comes in ninth house, it is empty. The 10th house, you just have Saturn and Mars. Forget about them in the being in the 10th house, it has no problem there. But where first of all, Saturn residing in the 10th house, there's a Bihuruga Sarla Paddhati rule that states that wherever Saturn resides, he will spoil the bhava or the characteristics of the house next to its residence. Here Saturn is residing in the 10th house, so it will spoil the characteristics of 11th house. 11th house is house of desires, so the characteristics of desires, irrespective of what type of desire it is got spoiled by Saturn residing in the 10th house. Now the house got spoiled. In that house you see the Lagnadipati and the 4th house lord Jupiter residing in that spoiled house. So not only that the house got spoiled by the Lagnadipati house lord residing in a spoiled house, indicates that the strength of that planet is got weakened because it is residing in a spoiled house. So overall, when you look at the chart and the law houses in the important houses and the lords, what you can say here is that first, like I said, the two primary reasons, the 7th pertaining to 7th house and the 6th house, is clearly explained here. And then the third reason, the third primary reason, the three primary reasons, I should say it that way, all the three are important, and all the three data as the core reason for this native, for a delay in marriage for this particular native. The third one is Jupiter residing in the 11th house with Saturn being in the 10th house. So let me do this way. Having said all these things, let's go and look at the planets' inclinations and their aspects and see if how are they helping the native to get married. After looking at the planet houses and the lords, let me go and look at the inclinations. First of all, are there any planets that are in Rasi Sandhi? That's the first step to look for. And here in this chart, with the assumption that the time of birth is correct, there are 3 planets that are in Rashi Sandhi, and all the 3 are fast moving planets: Sun, Moon and Venus. Moon takes almost 2 days, stays on at the most 2 days in each Rasi, whereas Sun will stay around 30 to 45 days, and Venus is also the same time. So let's start with the first Rasi Sandhi, Sun. Sun is from Rashi Lagna, Sun is the 9th house lord, Dharmasthanadipati, residing in the 8th house. So with that being the Rasi Lagna, so it is at 0 degrees Cancer. If we assume, because of Rasi Lagna, if you take the Sun and put it in the previous house, that will be the 7th house, where Mercury, Venus and Rahu are residing. That's where this Sun will also be going to reside, if we consider Sun to be in the Gemini. And that means Sun, the 9th house lord, is in 7th house, co-joined with the most malefic planet Rahu. So the Dharmasthanadipati is residing in the 7th house, indicates that the marriage, something against the dharma. And now if we assume Sun to be in Cancer, so the Dharmasthanadipati is in the 8th house, Marakasthanamo, so it's not a good sign. The next thing you have to do is look at Moon. Moon is also in 0 degrees, so if you consider Moon to be in Aries, the previous house, that will be the 5th house, and it's going to have a direct aspect on Jupiter. Okay, but if you consider a Moon in being in Aries, the 6th house, which is the Dagdasthanamo, or an unfavorable house, that's where you have Saturn and Mars. So then from Moon, Mars is in the 6th house, which is a Dagdasthanamo and Kujadosha. sixth house is house of separations. So in case if they need that, because of this reason, the NATO might get separated. Now if you consider moon to be in Taurus, where it is right now, then in sixth house is Libra, and in sixth house you have the Lagnadipati. So then also sixth house is because sixth house is Dagdastanamu and house of separation from moon. That's where the Jupiter, the Lagna, see the eighth, if from moon Jupiter is the eighth house lord, that's where the eighth house lord is there. So the separation might be due to be the separation might be because the NATO became a widow, became a widow. And remember the same thing when sixth house lord is in the seventh house or vice versa. There are two possible conditions, as I just told you now. One is delay in marriage, or the second is a party to become a widow. And here with the moon residing in Taurus and the eighth house lord residing in the sixth house, there's a high possibility for the NATO to become a widow in case if she gets married. So remember, if she gets married, that's a very important thing to notice here. The last one is Venus. Venus is the natural seventh house lord. So anytime the natural seventh house lord is in, let me tell you the generic statement is, when the natural seventh house lord is any of the bad houses like the Marakasthanu second, seventh, 8th, 12th. Sometimes people take even 6th also. So 2nd, 6th, 7th, 8th, 6, 7, 8 and 12. Second house, 6, 7, 8 and 12 houses. If the Venus is residing in any of these houses from natal moon, then the natural seventh house lord being Venus, the results might have a major impact for the NATO when it comes to marriage or marital discord. Here the Venus is, that is the seventh house. So if we assume Venus to be in the sixth house, then the sixth house lord is in sixth house co-joined with the eighth house lord moon. That's one set of weakness for the need to not to get married, or if the need to get married, will become a widow very quickly. If Venus is assumed to be in the seventh house the way you see in the chart, then the sixth house lord is in the seventh house co-joined with the seventh house lord and Rahu. So there will be a delay in marriage, or if the marriage does happen, then the NATO term becomes a widow, either of the way. So irrespective whether the Venus is on Gemini, Taurus or Gemini, wherever Venus is, one of the most possible thing is the NATO becoming a widow as soon after the marriage because of this reason. Now that is there any other thing? No, these are the only three planets that I see that are in Rasi Sandhi for this particular need. Once the houses and house lords analysis is completed and the inclination of the important planets are being done, then I go and look at the aspects of the most important planets in the chart when pertaining to marriage and marital discord. Here the most important planets is the second house lord is Saturn, that's very important. The 12th house lord is Mars, that's very important. The 7th house lord is Mercury. Of course the 8th house lord is Moon. So you have these four to look at it. So now Saturn's, let's start with the first house, second house lord Saturn. Saturn's third aspect is on the 12th house from Rashi Lagna, which is owned by Mars, and Saturn is co-joined with Mars. So the second house lord is joined with the 12th house lord, and the second house lord is having an aspect on the 12th house. So that tells you that there's a strong relationship between 12th house and the second house. 12th house is the Mars, a violent planet, and the second house is the ability to start a family, and that was a malefic planet owns it. So both the houses got thoroughly spoiled just by this combination of aspecting. Now Saturn's direct aspect is on the fourth house, which is the home life environment. That means it is a malefic planet is looking at a home life environment is not a good sign. And then Saturn's 10th aspect. Saturn's 10th aspect is on the 7th house from Rashi Lagna. That is where your 6th house Lord Venus is there, your 7th house Lord Mercury is there, where Rahu is there. That's enough. So just by looking at the three aspects of Saturn, it's clearly visible that this particular native, first of all, the chances are extremely low for the native to get married, and if it happens, the marital life will not be happy at all. The next thing I look at is Mars, the 12th house Lord Mars, actually 12th and 5th house Lord Mars. Mars' 4th aspect is on the first house, so a violent planet is looking at the first house. Already Rahu is already looking at the first house, and now a violent planet Mars is also looking at the first house. So Tadusthanamu, the bus, is not at all good for this particular native. Next, the Mars direct aspect is on the 4th house. Mars 8th aspect is on the 5th house, the one that it owns. So a violent planet is now looking the 1st house, 4th house and the 5th house. That itself tells you that how chaotic the life for this particular native will be when it comes to self, about herself, and then her home life environment and her ability to have children. The last one that I look at is its 7th house Lord, the 7th house Lord Mercury. Its direct aspect is just on the 1st house. And then the 8th house Lord Moon, its direct aspect is on residing in the 6th house. The 8th house Lord is residing in the 6th house, and it is having a direct aspect on the 12th house owned by Mars. So you can clearly tell that the two important planets are thoroughly spoiled the ability for the native to get married. And accidentally, if the native gets married for some reason, maybe the Vimsottari Dasa has cooperated or made that event to happen, or the transit planet somehow made that event to happen. If that does happen, Mars and Saturn together will make sure that the home life environment and the ability to have children or ability to start a family will be completely chaotic for this particular. Since it is a female chart, the last thing that I look is for the possibility for a Kujdosha, and at the same time look at the chart from Chandralagana, means wherever the moon is residing, we assume that house to be the first house, and from there we start looking at the important houses like the second, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th and 12th. These are all the important houses when you are looking at the possibility for a native to get married. First of all, from moon, natal moon, Mars is in the 5th house, so no Kujdosha, thank God. And then from Venus, natal Mars is in the 4th house. Yes, it is a Kujdosha, since the 4th house deals with home life environment. It's a Kujdosha pertaining to home life environment, but this Kujdosha does not say that the native won't get married. But if the native gets married, the home life environment will be completely chaotic, with what you call all the time having issues, fightings, all those things. Now remember, we had, if I remember, moon is in the what you call Rashi Sandhi. Venus is also in Rashi Sandhi. So if you consider the Rashi Sandhis and moon, if moon is in Aries, then Mars will be in is the 6th house. That is a Dagdasthanamu. It's not a good sign, so it's a Kujdosha. If Venus is in Taurus, its own house, and then Mars will be in the 5th house, then it is no Kujdosha. So if you look at it, if you look moon and Venus where they are based on the chart, where they are as you see on the screen, then the Kujdosha is only through Venus. If you consider the Rashi Sandhi and move both of them to the previous houses, then the Kujdosha is from moon. Overall, because of the Rashi Sandhis, the Kujadosha is now is both from Moon and Venus for this particular native. It's clearly visible there, and that's the reason why you can see the reason why the native is not able to get married is because from the Moon, the sixth house, Mars is in the sixth house, that is the house of separation from Moon. Okay, now let's go and look at the Chandralagana. I will assume that Moon is in Taurus. With that assumption, Rahu is in the second house, and the first house lord is Venus. The sixth house lord is also Venus, is in the second house with the second house lord Mercury. So the ability to start a family is 0. And then if you consider Moon to be in Taurus, then the seventh house lord is Mars, and Mars is in the fifth house from Moon. So the seventh house lord Mars is in the fifth house, co-joined with the ninth house lord Dharmasthana, but is Saturn, is not a good sign. So the chances for that also is close to 0 when you consider the Chandralagana with the Moon being in Taurus. Now we will go backwards, and since Moon is in Rasi Sandhi, let's go back, move Moon to the previous house, that is Aries. If Moon is in Aries, what happens is that when the Moon is in Aries, then Mars is in the sixth house. I told you already that Mars is in the sixth house, that is not a good sign, Rogasthanamo. So then Venus will be the seventh house lord, which will be in the third house from Moon, but co-joined with the third house lord, and Mercury will be the sixth house lord at that time. So Venus, the seventh house lord, has co-joined with the sixth house lord again in the third house, and co-joined with Rahu. That's not also a good sign. And if Moon is in Aries, then Jupiter, which is the 12th house lord from Moon, when Moon is in Aries, Jupiter is the 12th house lord, is in the 7th house. That's the only positive sign that I can see in this native whole chart, in this native's whole chart. The last thing that I look in any chart before I come to any conclusion is go through the Bihurug Chakra Paddhati and the chart. And the native was born in July 1982. So according to Bihurug Chakra Paddhati, the Venus will be the cycle ruler from 2006 July and add 12 years, that is 2018 July. All the way until 2018 July, Venus will be the cycle ruler, and the next cycle ruler is Sun. And there is no need to look at that cycle ruler Sun's what happens in according to Bihuru Chakra Paddhati, because from Rashi Lagna, Sun is the 9th house lord. It has nothing to do with marriage, and Sun is residing the 8th house from Rashi Lagna, which is not a good sign to support it also. So now the question comes is, in these 12 years, why didn't it happen? We know that during the whole 12 years of time, it is the Rahu Mahadasa that was running for this particular native all the way till 2021. So the chances are close to 0. But at the same time, since Venus is the cycle ruler, let's go and look at where is the natal Venus residing. Natal Venus is residing in the 7th house. That is a positive sign from Rashi Lagna, but unfortunately it is the 6th house lord and 12th house lord too, of course, but it is the 6th house lord residing in the 7th house and co-joined with the planet, uncertainable planet Rahu. So even though Venus activates different houses, the activation is not a positive activation, and the activation is not strong enough for an event to happen. This is how you look at the Bihurug Chakra Paddhati to see, is there any possibility, after having gone through all those things, all the D1 chart analysis, Vimsotri Dasa analysis, everything, just I look at the Bihurug Chakra Paddhati to cross check whether what I found out in the other two analysis, how far is that valid here in Bihurug Chakra Paddhati. Thank you for the listening to this analysis of all the four charts.